In Mexico, inflation continues to hold relatively steady. The Mexican government says core inflation, which does not include food or fuel prices, rose a modest 1/3 of a percentage point, or 0.32%. Now, for more on this, CCTV's Frank Contreras joins us live from Mexico City. Frank, what are the details?
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, the Mexican government is glad to report that it's been able to keep a lid on inflation now for 5 consecutive months running. And of course, that's good news for consumers here. Now, this comes despite the fact that hurricanes swept through the country. As you remember, in September, they did major damage to important food crops. And of course, that has driven prices up for certain foods. Fuel prices have also been rising.
Liquefied petroleum gas. It's one of those also necessary products that most people in Mexico use for heating water and cooking. Prices for this gas have been going up steadily. This is how the product is delivered to customers across most of Mexico. The fuel contained in this steel tank has a combined weight of around 60 kilos. This slow and constant rise in the price of cooking gas, of course, is felt all across the Mexican economy, especially by the poorest Mexicans, who by the government's own figures make up 50% of the population. The way the government calculates core inflation does not include prices for fuels and basic foods, costs that can hit lower income Mexicans hard. Still, business analyst Eduardo Garcia says Mexico's central bank has done a decent job of keeping inflation in check.
Even though people might complain about inflation because one item went up, the overall index or the overall basket of goods that they're purchasing doesn't necessarily go up or goes up less frequently than it did a few years back.
The steady rise in the price of cooking gas has a knock-on effect on the price of Mexico's most basic foods, including prices for the all-important corn tortilla. Cindy Gonzalez and her husband both work to make ends meet, and they're just weeks away from having their second child.
Prices rise, but our salaries remain the same.
It's an ongoing story, and one that many say is retold every month. It starts with stagnant wages, then the government reports inflation is under control, and prices for essential items like food and fuel, which are omitted from the calculation, continue their slow and steady rise.
So as you can see, Michelle, nobody here is ever happy. Here, or probably anywhere, is happy to know that prices are rising. Still, for its part, the Mexican government says that for more than a decade now, it's been able to keep control over macroeconomic inflation.
Thanks, Frank. Meanwhile, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has revised the GDP for Mexico lower. What are the exact details, and what has been the reaction to this revision?
Yeah, this is important news coming from the International Monetary Fund. As you'll remember, back in July, it was forecasting that Mexico's gross domestic product, the full amount of productivity coming from the Mexican economy, would be somewhere around 2.9%. That was back in July, Michelle. But now, just in the last few days, the IMF updating its forecast and really bringing the numbers quite a bit further down, now suggesting that Mexico's economy will only grow 1.2%. It's largely citing 3 reasons for that. The first one having to do with a lower level of government spending from the Mexican administration here, now in control, the Enrique Peña administration, spending less and sending less money to its providers out around Mexico. Also citing other issues, key issues, things like imports from the United States, the demand from imports from there, still quite a bit low. And so all of these reasons really affecting the IMF's decision to turn down its forecast.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much for that report, Frank Contreras, live for us from Mexico City, Mexico. Meanwhile,